I'm Mrs. Beaudin and I teach 3rd grade, and I'll be reading Chapter 2, Singing Snowflakes. After recess, my friends wanted to talk about the winter program. Mrs. Brisbane, on the other paw, wanted to talk about science. I tell you what, she said, since you'll be singing about snowflakes, let's talk about them. It turns out that snowflakes are so interesting. I found out that snowflakes are made of little crystals of ice. Each snowflake has 6 sides. Snow forms in clouds where the temperature is below freezing. No 2 snowflakes are ever the same. Ice crystals form around tiny bits of dirt. Can you believe a beautiful snowflake starts with a piece of dirt? As they get heavier, the snowflakes fall toward the ground. If we're lucky, we'll get to do a science experiment with real snow, Mrs. Brisbane said. What else can we do with snow? Oh, I love to go sledding, Sophie said. We live on a hill, and last year it snowed and all the kids in the neighborhood sledded all day. The hill was bumpy, so we bounced all the way down. And then my cousins came over and some friends, and my mom made chili, and we made popcorn too, and then the next day... Sophie paused for a breath. Thank you, Sophie, Mrs. Brisbane said quickly. Who else has an idea? I don't think Stop Talking Sophie was finished talking. To speak the truth, she never is. She can talk more than anybody I know. I like building snowmen, Holly said. Then she yawned a huge yawn. My other friends came up with so many interesting things to do, like building snow forts and making ice cream out of snow. I've never done any of those things because hamsters don't like the cold, despite our fur coats. Still, I enjoy watching the snow from the warmth of my cage indoors. Then Mrs. Brisbane said, and, of course, one of your songs is about the idea that no 2 snowflakes are exactly alike. I like the words to the song Mrs. Lark gave us today. I think it's true for this class. The words? What words? I wanted to get my paws on that song and find out what it said. After all, if I was going to be a part of the show with my friends, I needed to know my part. Soon, all of my friends hurried off to lunch, except for one. Holly was still at her desk, yawning. Mrs. Brisbane noticed too. Holly, are you feeling all right? I'm fine, Holly answered in a weak voice. Mrs. Brisbane walked over to her table. You seem tired today. Maybe you should go see the school nurse. Or I could call your mother to pick you up if you're sick. Holly yawned. No, I'm fine, she said again. Then Mrs. Brisbane did a strange thing. She put her hand on Holly's forehead. I tell you, humans never stop surprising me with their odd behavior. Did you bring your lunch? Mrs. Brisbane asked. Holly nodded. You can eat in here if you'd like. It's nice and quiet. We could eat together, Mrs. Brisbane said. Mrs. Brisbane brought her lunch bag over to Holly's table, and they took out all kinds of yummy-looking food, like sandwiches and hamster-rific carrot sticks. They didn't talk for a while as they ate. Then Mrs. Brisbane asked, Are you all ready for the holidays? Not really, Holly said. I still have a lot of presents to make. It's nice to make presents, Mrs. Brisbane said, but it's a lot of work. You can squeak that again, I said. Holly's working so hard she's not even sleeping. It might make her sick. I know that all Mrs. Brisbane could hear was squeak, 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 but I wish she could understand me. Who are you making presents for? Mrs. Brisbane asked. Everyone in the class, Holly said. Oh, and I forgot I have to make something for Miss Lark. Mrs. Brisbane looked puzzled. We don't have a gift exchange in this class. I know, Holly said, but I figured I'm going to deliver them outside of class. Mrs. Brisbane chewed a bite of her sandwich and then said, That's nice of you, but why do you want to do this? I love to make things, and I love to give gifts to show how much I like everybody, Holly said. Then they'll like me back. Then Mrs. Brisbane did something I don't see her do very often. She frowned. Holly, your classmates like you for who you are, she said. You don't need to give people presents to make them like you. You know that, don't you? I was so glad to hear my teacher squeak up. That's right, I agreed. Holly thought for a moment. I guess they do. It's important to get enough sleep, Holly, Mrs. Brisbane said. You don't want to get sick for the holidays. It's amazing. Even if she didn't understand what I said, Mrs. Brisbane seemed to know what I was thinking. I guess that's what makes her such a great teacher. Holly yawned again. Mrs. Brisbane and Holly chatted a little more while they finished lunch. Then my teacher said, "Why don't you put your head on your table and rest until the others come back?" "Couldn't I work on making my presents instead?" Holly asked. "I brought some of my projects with me." Mrs. Brisbane shook her head. "No, Holly. Please drop the idea of making presents for everyone. Put your head down and rest." Holly agreed, and soon she was fast asleep. Of course, Holly woke up when our friends came back into the class. Maybe she didn't wake up all the way, though. Later in the day, Mrs. Brisbane read to us from a wonderful book about a girl named Alice falling down a rabbit hole, which sounds like terrifying to a small creature like me. And just like our program, it took place in Wonderland, but not the kind where it snows. It was hard to follow the story, though, because while Mrs. Brisbane was reading, Holly kept yawning, and then they kept getting longer and longer. Yawn. 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 Then I noticed something funny. Once Holly started yawning, all the other humans in the room began to yawn. Even I started to yawn, and I'm not a human. I finally crawled into my sleeping hut for a nap. I was only sorry that Holly couldn't fit in there too. Og, do you remember the time that you and I got snowed in? I asked my neighbor that night when school was empty. Boing, boing, Og replied. Doesn't seem that long ago, I said. In fact, it was earlier this year, but so much has happened since then. And now winter is back. Boing, Og sounded surprised. I wonder if it will snow again. I wonder what a wonderland looks like. And I wonder what that snowflake song is like, I squeaked. Og splashed around in his water a little, but he didn't answer my questions. It was beginning to get dark in room 26, but my hamster eyes see well in the dark. And as I looked across the room, I noticed a sheet of white paper under Be Careful Kelsey's table. I wonder, I squeaked. Og, do you think that's a copy of the snowflake song? Og splashed a little louder. I was thinking about opening the lock that doesn't lock on my cage and trying to read the paper when I heard a familiar rattle, rattle, rattle coming down the hall from the classroom. The first time I'd heard that rattling, I thought a ghost was coming, but now I knew it was only Aldo coming in to clean. He isn't anything like a ghost, thank goodness. Suddenly the door swung open and a bright light filled the room as Aldo appeared, pushing his cleaning cart. Never fear, 'cause Aldo is here, his voice boomed out. Greetings, Aldo, I squeaked at the top of my tiny lungs. Hello, Humphrey. Hello, Og. How are my favorite classroom pets? He said. I was glad we were his favorites. George, the frog with the deep voice in Miss Loomis's class, isn't one bit friendly. Sometimes it's difficult to understand Og, but I don't understand the hermit crabs in Miss Becker's room at all. I've liked Aldo since my first night in room 26. It was fun to watch him, especially when he showed me his trick of balancing a broom on his fingertip. Aldo came over to our table and bent down so his face was level with my cage and Og's tank. I love to see Aldo up close because he has a big furry black mustache that wiggles when he talks. Sometimes I wonder if he stores extra food in there, the way I do in my cheek pouch. Say, have you heard about this Winter Wonderland show? He asked. It's going to snow in the gym, and that's no joke. Get it? That's no joke. We laughed, and his mustache, when he laughed, his mustache shook. It made me cold to think of snow outside, but the thought of snow inside the school made my teeth chatter. Here's a snow joke for you, Aldo said. How do snowmen travel around? I had no idea. So I was happy when Aldo said, by icicle. Get it? An icicle, like a bicycle? That's funny, I squeaked. Here's another one, Aldo continued. What do you call a snowman in the summer? A puddle! Aldo's mustache shook even harder as he laughed at this joke along with me. Then Aldo went to work cleaning the classroom. He dusted the tables and was careful not to disturb anything on Miss Brisbane's desk. Aldo admires Mrs. Brisbane. So do I. He's even going to school to learn to be a teacher like her someday. Next, Aldo got out his broom and started sweeping. I climbed up to the top of my tree branch so I could have a better look. He had collected quite a pile of dust and paper trimmings in the time he reached the piece of paper near Kelsey's table. He bent down and picked it up. What's this? He studied the paper. Oh, it's a song. Hey, I'll bet this is a song for the winter show. What's it say? I squeaked loudly. Boing, boing, boing! Og twanged excitedly. Aldo started to whistle. I'm not quite sure how he did that, because I couldn't see his mouth under that big floppy mustache. I like it, he said. That's a nice idea. Please, please, please bring it over here, I squeaked. I guess Aldo didn't understand, because he put the paper back on Kelsey's table. After he finished his work and the tables were in neat rows again, he pulled a chair up next to my cage and took out his dinner. He always eats his dinner with Og and me. Richie said his class is going to build a snowman in the gym, Aldo told us. Richie is Aldo's nephew. He was in room 26 with me last year. Aldo chuckled. Now that's something, isn't it? It certainly is, I squeaked. It would have to be cold, cold, cold in that gym if they didn't want the snowman to melt. I shivered a little. I like that snowflake song, though. Aldo pushed a crunchy piece of lettuce between the bars of my cage. Sing it to us, Aldo, I said. He didn't sing, but he hummed a little. Then he sang. Each one is special, just like me and you. Aldo chuckled again. I guess you two snowflakes aren't alike at all, he said, and you're both special, all right. After he finished his meal, Aldo threw a few froggy food sticks into Og's tank. My friend took a deep dive in the water to catch them. Before I knew it, Aldo had rolled his cart out into the hallway and turned off the lights. Night-night, he said before closing the door. The room was dark and quiet. I waited until I saw Aldo's car leave the parking lot a little later. Then I jiggled the lock that doesn't lock on my cage and scrambled over to Og's tank. Did you hear that, Og? I asked. He caught us snowflakes. Boing, boing, he said. And he said we were special. I guess that's what the song says, I explained. I glanced at Kelsey's table and saw the paper lying there. I wish I could go over there and read it, I said. Since I've been the classroom pet in room 26, I've learned to read. I can even write in the little notebook hidden behind my mirror. And I've learned to open my lock that doesn't lock, get out of my cage, and explore room 26 at night. But there was no way that I could get from my cage to Kelsey's tabletop, because I can't shimmy up such a tall, smooth leg. And I couldn't leap from her chair to the table because her chair was pushed all the way in. I guess we'll have to wait until tomorrow, I squeaked to my neighbor. It was suddenly getting chilly in room 26. I looked forward to burrowing down into my nice, warm bedding. Boing, boing, Og answered. It sounded as if he agreed with me, so I said goodnight and went back to the comfort of my cage. Hamsters are often wide awake at night, so I had plenty of time to think. If the students in room 26 were snowflakes, certainly no two were alike. Slow down Simon was always in a rush, while hurry up Harry was often late. Do it now Daniel put things off, while helpful Holly did everything right away. One paw was tall and the other paw was short. Oh, and Stop Talking Sophie was complete opposite of quiet Speak Up Saya from last year's class. Even the classroom pets, Og and I, were different as night and day. I have beautiful golden fur. He's green and has no fur at all. He likes water and I should never, never, never get wet. I say squeak and he says boing. And those are only a few of our differences. I guess I wasn't wide awake after all, because I drifted off to sleep and dreamed about the snowflakes and jingle bells and prancing horses. Humphrey's Winter Wonderings. Could there possibly be any two snowflakes as different as Og and me?